ડોક્ટર તાના ત્રિવેદી દ્વારા અમદાવાદ યુનિવર્સિટી કેમ્પસમાં નેરેટિંગ ધ ઇન્ડિયા સ્ટોરી બેસ્ટ ઇન્ડિયન હિસ્ટોરિયન્સ અંડર વન રૂફ વિષય વિશિષ્ટ રજૂઆત કરવામાં આવી. ડોક્ટર તાના ત્રિવેદી પટણી આર્કાઇવ્સના શૈક્ષણિક સલાહકાર દ્વારા એક પ્રોજેક્ટ અંતર્ગત ભાવનગર રાજ્યના પૂર્વ દિવાન સર પ્રભાશંકર પટણીના જીવન અને સમયને આર્કાઇવ્સ અને સંશોધનોમાં સમાવેશ કરી આ સત્ર ઇતિહાસ, પુરાતત્વ અને આર્કાઇવ્સના બે સૌથી ભરોસાપાત્ર સંસાધનોમાંથી સાધનોની આંતરદ્રષ્ટિ, તથ્યો અને વાર્તાઓ ખુલ્લી મૂકવામાં આવી હતી. જે અન્વયે ભારતમાં પ્રથમ વખત હિસારના રાખી ગઢીમાં 7500 વર્ષ જૂના દફન સ્થળમાંથી પ્રાચીન ડીએનએ કાઢવામાં સફળતા પ્રાપ્ત થઈ હતી.
Whereas all that I find in these journals and writings of these times is about, let's become a federation, right? United, like we already anyway had United States of Kathiawar, right? And then like United States of India sort of a thing, you know. So like Chinmay uses the word counterfactual, you know. So for me that's very interesting to see that, you know, it's a different, I mean, possibilities of histories which did not materialize.
So this ties into the, you know, thing we were discussing in the morning. What ifs of the...
Absolutely. So that's what I was reminded of, you know, what if we eventually would have become a federation.
Interesting.
Before you conclude, maybe can I say words? Now, I began with the incidents, you know.
So that we're getting our facts right. So say for instance there is something that has emerged from the archives, right? And I mean maybe there is some factual information that has emerged. Now we live in times where we have access to a lot of information. So one thing that is most obvious is to also cross-verify the facts with other sources to ensure that whatever that we are presenting is verified. But you know, here let me also just tell you a very interesting story about verification, you know. So when I was going through one of the journals, which is a part of this 6,000 book collection from the Patni Library, there is a journal which was published. It is Deshi Rajya. It was published between 1927 to 41. In one of the issues, there was a story of a horse trader. Now the story dates back to the 19th century, so you know, early 1800s. So it is an archive within an archive, right? And it was a story of a horse trader from Kutch who was really one of the first agents. English, not English. He was Kutchi, a Gujarati Kutchi, but he was the first agent for the Britishers to actually buy horses from Afghanistan and then send them to Mysore to the Britishers to fight against Tipu Sultan. Right? Now there's an entire story, and this story appears in parts in that journal, which is also now a part of the archive. Now what happened was, when I went to UK last year, I was going through the archives in London, in the British Library archives. So the name of the trader is Sheikh Sundarji Saudagar, right? That's his name. And when I go to the archives and I open one account of a British officer of a similar, who was in a similar area, I get the same story, in the sense from his perspective, and it is not a story. He is actually giving me an account of how Sheikh Sundarji Saudagar is struggling to give us horses because of some drought and so on and so forth. You know, so somewhere for me it is very exciting because I'm already able to verify the fact that our story, you know, there was one story here of Sundarji Saudagar. Now it's verified that there was a trader and he used to supply horses, right? And he was a ferry. So in that sense, it requires a lot of work, but it is very important that we do verify, that we cross-check, you know, what also emerges. So yeah, sorry.
Before reminds me of Rudyard Kipling's book called Kin, right? The role of the horse merchant.
This is pre-independent India, and one of the princely states was Bhavnagar. Now, in the princely state, you would have a divan to the king, right? And in Bhavnagar, we had Sir Prabhashankar Patni, who was a divan to the king. And he played a very significant role early 20th century, and you know, Bhavnagar was one of the very progressive princely states of those times. And
I would like to interrupt you, and you know, I had this question in mind for a long time. Some of the people say that 1920s is around the time when they said a time of enlightenment and
Yes,
enlightenment
yes.
for princely state. Is that true, and why? I mean, what was happening at that point of time?
Right. So if you just, most of us are familiar with world history also. So you have the end of the First World War, early 20th century. We are under the colonial rule, and again, the history tells us that our Maharajas contributed in a very large way towards a war effort, because we were also under their rule. So we contributed in terms of soldiers, in terms of logistics, and in several ways. And there was an idea that once the war ended, we would have a charter for our independence. Clearly, that did not happen, right? However, we already knew that we were going to get independence in the near future. So when we look at 1920s and 30s, we have a lot of these princely states who are, these progressive princely states who are actually encouraging, students who are giving state scholarships for them to go abroad and study and equip themselves in a way that they can come back and contribute to state building and nation building in that way. Right, so in case of Bhavnagar, there were state-sponsored scholarships to MIT to study in MIT, and then the students would come back, and then they would be like looking at policy and so on and so forth. So this is what we mean by this change that was happening really in the early 20th century. Of course, we have the Indian National Congress also talking about independence. You have Gandhi, you have Sardar, you have all that. That also happening together. So we are looking at moving towards freedom, but we also know that we have to equip ourselves for the freedom that's going to happen. And in that sense, these progressive princely states played a significant role, which I think we've not really looked at in a lot of detail. So I'm hoping that answers your question. But yes, so this is what got me interested to the, with the Patni archives. And
so tell us about, something that really